Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So, as the revelations continue to come, senior politicians in Westminster are scrambling to get their house in order. Yesterday, the Prime Minister wrote to all the other party leaders in the Commons, inviting them to a meeting next Monday to come up with the serious, swift, cross-party response this issue demands. Mrs May went on to call for a common, transparent, independent grievance procedure for all those working in Parliament and said a dedicated support team should be available to all staff that would recommend all criminal allegations be reported to the police. The proposals come after further revelations appeared in the press, including a former parliamentary intern telling the BBC that he was sexually assaulted by a former MP in 2012, and a report in the London Evening Standard about a woman alleging she was sexually assaulted by the Conservative MP she worked for. Meanwhile, First Minister of State Damien Green, who's been accused of inappropriate behaviour, is being investigated by the Cabinet Secretary over whether he broke the ministerial code. However, there are claims some MPs are being unfairly accused. Conservative MPs Rory Stewart and Dominic Raab, whose names appear on a spreadsheet of unverified accusations, both went public to deny the allegations levelled against them. Speaking earlier today, the former Conservative leader, Ian Duncan-Smith, said the culture in Westminster is now changing.
At the end of the day, yes, there are sexual issues and there are some charges that are not as powerful as other charges, but the key element here is about abuse of power, and I think that's the point to dwell on. And in any organisation that people use power to coerce people to do things that they would not normally do, that is offensive behaviour, and that is what this is really all about, which is to say, you know, even if that was sort of quasi-tolerated in the past, it won't be tolerated from here on.
Well, I'm joined now by the Shadow Women and Equalities Minister Dawn Butler and by the Conservative peer Anne Jenkin, who founded the Women to Win campaign, which aims to elect more Conservative women to Parliament. Anne Jenkin, Michael Fallon said when he resigned that what was acceptable 10, 15 years ago is clearly not acceptable now. Was it ever acceptable when you first started out in Parliament?
Well, that's a good point, Jo. I mean, I started working in Parliament in 1976. And I was a young woman, many of the young women who are out there today was. And I was, well, I would say hit on, you know, pretty regularly. And there was definitely nobody I could have gone to. There was nobody to talk to. But the point that I'm very struck by is that in those days there were 4% of women MPs, 27 women in total in Parliament. And it was a sort of acceptable way of behaviour. I mean, the Cecil Parkinson, all of that happened around my date.
Was it acceptable or was it just tolerated?
I mean, I was never really, you know, assaulted in any way that I felt deeply upset about. But there were definitely.
But you were harassed, you say?
I was asked to go back to MPs' houses, but I wouldn't have dreamt of doing that. I mean, I think we slapped them down and we moved on. I'm not suggesting for a minute that some of this stuff isn't really serious, but I mean, my main point is, if you have more women in Parliament, which has been Theresa's campaign as well, you get not only better decisions, but you have a better environment and a better culture.
Except it still goes on, it seems. Not all of these allegations, and yes, they are allegations, are historic. Some of them are relatively recent. I mean, do you think there has been a sense that no one wanted to rock the boat in the past, and that's why people have been, to some extent, allowed to get away with it? Well,
it's difficult for me to be able to say because I'm down the other end of the corridor where I don't think so much of it happens, and I'm much older and I don't hang about the sports and social club, and I don't think that is the case. But I just would like to make the point about these allegations, because I was contacted by a young woman who found herself on that list, totally innocent, no inappropriate behaviour, and yet this list is ruining people's lives. I mean, whether you deny it or not, your name is always, you know, you Google somebody, their careers are going to be destroyed as a result of this. So I think that there's a difference between allegations and the kind of swirling innuendo and rumour that everybody is so sort of, you know, we're just in the middle of this sort of terrible period that has just got to calm down, sort out the difference between proper predatory behaviour, rape allegations, so on, and the kind of touching of a knee, and consensual acts, by the way, which are also on that list.
Do you think this list that has been doing the rounds with various MPs on it, Tory MPs, do you think it's been helpful when a lot of the allegations, in fact, they're not allegations, they are about extramarital affairs or sex between two consenting adults?
I don't think it's... I'm not sure I would describe it as being helpful. Obviously, to the whips, it's probably the way that they operate in terms of these are the situations that might embarrass the government. So they keep a list. And so I understand that to happen all the time in the whip's office. I used to be a whip. We didn't have a list like that. But so I wouldn't say it was helpful. I do agree with Anne in terms of if it's consenting adults, then that's different from predatory behaviour, which needs to be tackled, and it was never acceptable. It might have been that women didn't feel they could speak out about it, but it was never acceptable in my opinion.
Has the bar, Anne Jenkins, been set too low in your view in terms of judging politicians and whether they have behaved inappropriately when you look at the case of Michael Fallon, or actually does tough action and zero tolerance need to be enacted here?
Well, I think it will be going forward. I mean, things that people might have thought they could get away with will no longer be the case, and not just by the action that the Prime Minister is taking with the Speaker and so on. I think the fear of now of being fingered will make a massive difference as well.
But that's the way that we break the culture in Parliament,
yes,
because it was never acceptable. I think the Prime Minister has been slow to act, to be honest. I think she should suspend her ministers who haven't denied some wrongdoing.
For example?
I think for Stephen Crabb. I think whilst an investigation, once an investigation has taken place, then I think MPs should be suspended while this investigation takes place. I think that should be standard practice. I mean, I will be at the meeting on Monday with the Prime Minister, and I look forward to working across all parties, but I also think there's a value role for trade unions and the role that they play in Parliament that's often overlooked and dismissed really too easily.
Well, you mentioned Stephen Crabb. He's not a minister. Do you think Damien Green, the First Secretary of State, who's being investigated by the Cabinet Secretary, should he be suspended or should he resign while this is going on?
I can't possibly comment on a matter that's already being investigated until I hear the results of the investigation. It would be grossly unfair. And as Baroness Jenkins has quite rightly put, these are allegations at the moment. But Dawn's absolutely right. It was never acceptable. It was never acceptable for people to be afraid, for any reason, to go into a workplace to demonstrate the fullness of their talents. And it certainly is something that has held back the UK, that people have not been feeling comfortable in workplaces over previous years. They should do now. We should all feel safe in our workplace, and we should all be able to express our talents, whatever they are.
Are you frustrated by the behaviour of some of your older colleagues? Do you think there is a generational issue in the Houses of Parliament, that behaviour that some of your older colleagues in the House might think was acceptable for you and your contemporaries is not?
Look, it would be absolutely unfair to blame an older generation, most of whom are completely blameless of this. And the action the Prime Minister has taken, I'm afraid I disagree with Dawn on this, has been very quick, because she realises that this is not only unacceptable...
Well, except Michael Fallon said what was perhaps acceptable 10 to 15 years ago isn't now. What did you think of that statement from...
Michael Fallon has resigned. I'm not going to comment on his own statement. The Prime Minister has answered it. What I am going to say is that the...
But what does it say about that generation? I mean, he seems to be making a broader point.
His comments on his generation are for him to make. The comment I'm making is that that generation wasn't all guilty, and it would be wrong to slander everybody.
No one is saying that. It is about a difference of behaviour and how you actually set new standards and whether that is going to be possible. I mean, Ruth Davidson...
Right about that.
Well, Ruth Davidson, the leader of the Tories in Scotland, has said the dam has broken and that there needs to be a house clearing in the months and years ahead. Do you think there will have to be now more resignations, more sackings in order to reset everything in terms of sexual impropriety?
Well, I'm not completely sure about that. I mean, I think the new code of conduct which will be coming will be very, very clear. I mean, the danger in here, Joe, is that anybody can now make allegations about anything. I mean, they could make completely false ones. They could say I was in a lift with Tom Tugendhat and he pressed up against me. And who is going to believe an MP unless you're you know, really robust on this. I think we've got to be really careful going forward.
But do you think people do have to have someone they can speak to? I mean, up
Yes.
until now, because of the way MPs are self-employed, you cannot go to anyone apart from the party managers who are political in that very, you know, strict sense of the word, and they will do what they can to protect, wrongly, as many people would think, their own side.
Well, that's exactly what is going to be sorted out going forward.
Right. I mean, if you're looking ahead and the line that has to be drawn, do you think, Dawn Butler, now that anything like hands on knees, which was the allegation and the claim made about Michael Fallon, that all of that now has to stop and will stop?
I think if it's not consensual, it's harassment. So the bar should be set at not whether you put your hand on somebody's knee, but whether it's with permission or not. If it's without permission, regardless if you brush that arm away and say, you know, whatever to that person, that's not the point or the issue. And that's how we break the culture. We break the culture by tackling all of the harassment case and the abuses case. Because if you don't start with the little things, it makes it harder to deal with the bigger things. And
there have been fairly serious allegations, obviously, that Labour are having to deal with. First of all, the case of Jared O'Mara, who has been suspended, has lost the whip for misogynist and homophobic comments that he made. A rape allegation made by Bex Bailey against a Labour Party official. What is Labour doing at this point to deal with those?
So, as you said, Jared has been suspended from the whip while the investigation takes place. That's the right way to deal with the situation.
How long will it take?
I don't know. It's an investigation, so we have to let the investigation take its course. Labour Party has very strong, robust procedures, which it's had for years, but it's been improved over the last 12 months. Even this week, there was a bit that's been ratified by the National Executive Committee, and Labour's been had this for many years, and we take it very, very seriously. We've worked with the trade unions, we've worked with ACAS, we've worked with leading legal experts to make sure that our policy is robust. In regards to Bex Bailey, who had enormous courage to come forward and talk about her rape publicly, she talks about the independence of our policies and our review. And there is independence built in to our policies, but we're looking at how we make it even more independent. So as you said, you need to feel comfortable if something's happened to you, that you can talk about it to somebody and it will be dealt with sensitively, but also taken seriously.
Right. I mean, the rape allegation was obviously horrendous for Bex Bailey, but the other part of her story was that she went to speak to somebody within the Labour Party, someone senior, and she didn't feel her concerns were taken on. In fact, quite the opposite. She was told that her career may be harmed. What do you think about that as a woman in the Labour Party?
Oh, I'm devastated that that, you know, could ever happen. But the policy that the Labour Party has now and the procedures wasn't in place then.
Are you saying it could never happen now?
Well, I'm certain that the policies that are in place now would ensure that that wouldn't happen. But what happened to Bex needs to be investigated, because we're going to break the culture of, you know, is it acceptable or not acceptable, that we tackle whatever happened to make somebody think it was OK to give that information.
And Jackie, if someone came to you now saying they'd been sexually harassed, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say that would be, I mean, I think now the procedures will be in place. I mean, actually, it's more likely I'm getting people at the moment who say, I really haven't been, and I've got the highest respect for the MP I work for, and yet we found ourselves in this terrible storm. But, I mean, in the old days, well, before the new procedures, I would have gone to the Chief Whip, and I would have gone to the Whip's office, and I would have made sure that that whoever it was that had the allegations made against them was properly looked into.
Do you think some of the MPs or people who work for MPs who feel they've been wrongly accused, and as you say, that there is some anger and fear, will they take legal action? Do you think we will see action being taken?
I hear rumours that there might be, but of course that's a very expensive thing. And there aren't very many MPs probably in a position to be able to do that. But I do think that we've got to be really careful about getting this right, and that people who are innocent and are not going to be witch hunted, as well as the people who are guilty, who definitely need to step up.
Anne Jenkin and Dawn Butler, thank you very much.
The dark clouds of an unlucky premiership are hovering over Theresa May. There is the unmistakable feel of a Prime Minister struggling at times to control events. the Prime Minister has lost her Defence Secretary after he admitted that his behaviour had fallen short of the high standard expected of the armed forces. Theresa May has campaigned for decades to change the habits of the male-dominated world of Westminster.
Labelling feminists as obnoxious bigots is not the way forward to do that.
Domestic violence is an appalling crime. Many women were made to feel like they were making mountains out of molehills.
In the cruelest twist of all, the unravelling of this culture is now challenging her premiership.
It's almost like a Greek tragedy what Theresa May's legacy will potentially be. Nobody doubts that Theresa May hates this culture that she's having to now wrangle with. Nobody would deny that. But the fact of the matter is that she's too weak amongst her own people to really be able to dole out the punishments I am absolutely certain she would want to.
Theresa May is so weak she embarked on a minimal cabinet reshuffle, but it has left a sour taste. One senior Tory told me that it combined the intrigue of House of Cards with the self-promotion of the Rick Mail comedy Alan Bistard. This Tory told me that Gavin Williamson had used a colleague's misfortune to engineer his dream cabinet job, whilst ensuring that he still keeps a beady eye on the Tory party by making sure that his deputy now runs the Whip's office. Other Tories dismiss the febrile atmosphere at Westminster. They say it is wrong to suggest the Prime Minister is being weakened by the unmasking of a culture she has campaigned to reform.
I'm astonished by this sort of narrative. I mean, it has been something she's been passionate about, all the equality issues, gender issues, LGBT issues and so on, at a time when people in the Conservative Party didn't talk about it, didn't care very much. And I'm mystified by how somebody with such integrity is somehow the narrative is built up that it's almost her fault, which is clearly not the case, because almost all of this is historic and some of it is going back many, many years, and it's going to be very hard to prove. I think we've got to investigate the really serious stuff, and I'm sure she would be the first to say this, and then draw a line, move on and sort the stuff out.
I think the Prime Minister has led the way on this. She was very clear about it on Monday. In the statement, she was very clear at Prime Minister's questions, and she's made it clear to her cabinet, I gather read the Riot Act, and said, if in any way you believe you do not meet the standard that is to be tolerated, then you have to really think about your position. And to that extent, obviously Michael Fallon realised that he would not cross the bar that she had set, and therefore he went. And I think that's down to her leadership. I think it's down to her saying, you know, we have to take this seriously. We have to lead. It's not just about the Conservative Party, about the Labour Party too. They've got someone facing potential rape charges, you know, which is a very serious offence.
Theresa May is soldiering on, but after her inner circle was wiped out in the wake of the general election, she will be hoping that events do not conspire to make her an even more isolated figure.
Our political editor, Nick Watt, well, now to chew over the latest allegations from Westminster. I'm joined by the writer and broadcaster Ian Dale, the former Labour Special Advisor Aisha Hazariki, and the former aide to the Deputy Prime Minister Polly Mackenzie. Thank you all for joining us. Before we just talk about specifics here, and we'll talk about the issues for the Tory party, we'll talk about the issues for Labour. You heard Jess Phillips saying it's a Greek tragedy. I mean, it looks like, you know, Westminster is literally falling to bits, but also metaphorically falling to bits.
We've been here before, haven't we? Back in the 1990s, after Back to Basics, when you had a weak Prime Minister and you had day after day revelations in the press about affairs and all sorts of things in Parliament. Everyone thought everybody in Parliament was having an affair. Now, this is obviously slightly different. Sexual harassment is very different from having an affair. But it reeks of the same thing.
And it's a plague on all their houses, Polly, because this is nobody's escaping this.
No one has escaped. No party escapes. It's in the Lords, it's in the Commons. And I think Theresa May, unfortunately, has missed a bit of an opportunity to really, you know, put a new brew behind clearing this out.
Well, let's just talk about the Gavin Williamson position. You know, as you heard Nick Watt say there and others, that actually it's because she's so weak that Theresa May can't move to make a bolder move, but she wants to keep Gavin Williamson close.
Well, it is a pretty bold move to put someone from outside the cabinet into one of the most senior cabinet positions.
Is it a sign of weakness, though?
I don't think she's any weaker today than she was this time yesterday.
Which was weak?
Well, inevitably, she is not in a great position. The election determined that. But this has been done before. Gordon Brown put Jackie Smith from Chief Whip to Home Secretary, a more senior position than Defence Secretary. Margaret Thatcher did it with Cecil Parkinson. Jim Callaghan did it with David Owen.
But not in this kind of crisis, Polly.
I think it's extraordinary because the Whip's office, and Whip's offices across Parliament, have been part of the problem for covering up these problems. You know, where did this spreadsheet come from if it wasn't the Whip's office?
But we're in a situation, presumably, if Gavin Williamson, as now Defence Secretary, may well know about other examples of, we just don't know, of other bad behaviour, which will then come back to bite the cabinet.
Can I just say what I think this shows? I actually think that the reshuffle is a separate issue. What this story, and it's across all parties, I don't think anyone should be trying to gain political capital out of this. The complaint system does not work. There is no complaint system. Even if people take it to the Whips, it doesn't get used in the Whips is not a human resources department. The Whips office is there to control MPs.
I think we know that, and I think we know that we don't have a complaint system, but I think what people are still shocked, I think, in the wider world to know, is that actually there has been a real culture of sexual misbehaviour, harassment. And it's not about sex, it is about power.
It's about power. Westminster is still male-dominated. It tends to be older men in senior positions, junior women and men as well.
But women who say they felt uncomfortable, and the men saying, I had no idea you felt uncomfortable.
This is about leadership. Not only talking about Theresa May, and it's interesting because you can juxtapose what Theresa May has done with what Ruth Davidson said last night at the Spectator Party, which is you have to clean out the stable. I mean, she's quite definite that something very, very positive has to be done. And whether that's done on Monday when all the leaders get together or not, I don't know. But here we have a situation where Jeremy Corbyn's own office of Whips is also possibly very compromised.
Well, look, as I said before, it absolutely shows you that the system doesn't work. And I have spoken with people, you know, in the Whip's office, around Parliament still. The issue here, and there has got to be a full inquiry, and what I would like the Labour Party to do, actually, is to appoint somebody independent to come in and look at what is... We had a horrendous situation.
But let's actually look at the leadership on this. I mean, you know, we don't know, of course, what's going on behind the scenes, but we must say that I do not know that Jeremy Corbyn has been out being very condemnatory in the last 48 hours.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there are two problems here. One is sexual abuse by quite a small number of people, and then a much wider culture of secrecy and cover-ups. I'd like to see everybody who's ever made a complaint to the Whip's office, whoever it is, make a subject access request under the Data Protection Act to actually find out what records they've been keeping, because they say they didn't know, but we know that they did.
How does it fall between the cracks that you have these complaints against Kelvin and Hopkins, and then at the same... How could there be such a position where the woman who makes those complaints watches him walk into the shadow cabinet? And that makes the whole idea that women are in a
bed. He's an MP and she's not.
The whole issue of this is cultural. It's a combination of women not coming forward because there's no... and young men, because they don't want their names splashed across the newspapers. There's no confidential, anonymous way of reporting this stuff. And it's the power thing. A lot of people are scared.
It's not just the power thing.
It is the power thing,
Power
Ian.
does not create monsters, power reveals monsters. Do you know who said that? Frank Underwood in House of Cards, a rather inappropriate quote, you might think, in the circumstances. But the problem here is the Whips, because the job of the Whips is to get legislation through the House of Commons or to stop legislation going through the House of Commons. Anything else is of secondary importance. Now, there was a story on the front page of the Times a couple of days ago condemning the Conservative 1922 Committee for blocking David Cameron's attempts to give the Whip's office powers to sort these things out. They did it because they knew exactly what the Whip's office would do. They would cover these things up.
But the Whip's office is not there to support that. So just one thing. The problem is not the Whip's office. The problem is, I'm sorry, male MPs being sleazy and abusing their power.
I mean, everybody thinking that it's much more using to keep those things in a drawer so you can blackmail people later than actually sort the problems out.
So, in this situation, going back to the appointment of the new Defence Secretary, what would have been the bold thing that Theresa May could have done with that new appointment?
Well, she should have appointed a woman, the first female Defence Secretary.
Why should she have done?
Well, because
just as a statement, a sign of
intent. No, because there's plenty of women that presumably could do that job.
Was there an opportunity to put a woman into a job that men have historically done, an opportunity to say that she is you know, bringing a new broom to appointments and dealing with sexual harassment by putting in somebody who, hasn't got a history of doing it.
Anne Milton would have been a popular choice to be
I tweeted
the
that
chief
this
whip.
morning myself.
Anne Milton, you know, is experienced, she's respected. People are saying she's had good experience of the grievance procedure as well, so she might have signalled a fresh start
you've got
for
Esther
the whips.
McVeigh as deputy chief whip, so that's
What's a shame is
progress.
that Theresa May, you know, as it said in the video, absolutely does have a commitment
But
to promoting women, and she's
could
just
have made chief whip. I mean, that's...
Well, she could have done. When I saw her going to Downing Street, I assumed she was either going to be chief whip or the new chairman, of the Conservative Party. Why Theresa May didn't use the opportunity to have a new party chairman here, I do not know, because everyone knows Patrick McLaughlin wants to step down.
How damaging is it to the whole, you know, the whole prosecution of politics in this country that we're having a slow drip of even more egregious, and there are other things that, you know, the other night John Mann said in Newsnight that he knew of a rape at Westminster. You know, obviously didn't name names, but even that kind of conversation, he wouldn't be saying that unless he had a pretty good idea. So we know that more is to come, and how damaging is that to the standing of politicians who are standing by the expenses scandal and so forth is already very damaged.
Aisha and I have both stood for Parliament. We both wanted to be MPs, and I'm sure Aisha may well be in the future. I certainly won't. All of my friends say to me, you must be so relieved you never got into Parliament. When I told my mother I wasn't standing again, she cheered. Well, what a terrible thing, because she ought to want her son to go into Parliament. I'm glad now that I never became an MP.
Do you still want to go into Parliament?
Well, that's not the issue here.
But do you?
I don't know, not particularly, not right now. But the issue is, I don't think this is really the issue about how politicians are feeling about their reputation. This is about the victims. This is about sending a signal. Watching us squabbling about whether it, you know, who's up and who's down in a reshuffle is not the issue. The issue is people of all parties who feel that they have been treated badly need to feel that they can come forward and talk about this and be believed and not victimised and witch-hunted.
Yeah. Thank you all very much indeed.